Hi, everybody, and welcome back to Murder at Bedtime. I'm your host, Lyndon. If you are a returning listener, you will know by now that I think you are all awesome, and I can't thank you enough. If this is your first time here, then I'm dead chuffed you're here, and I hope I can persuade you to stay. I've had a really lovely surge in subscriptions this week, which is totally because of the shout out from the lovely Lindsay from the Stolen From Me YouTube podcast. So thank you all for joining me. It really is a pleasure. Thank you so much. So thank you once again, Lindsay. And please listen to her brilliant channel on YouTube. She's awesome. This is a 15 to 20-minute true murder bedtime story. No frills, no waffle, no adverts, no sponsors. Any inane waffle I have is all at the end. So just switch me off at the end or continue listening to me for any old gobbledygook that I have to report. And with that, let's get serious and crack on. Tonight's story is called Double Jeopardy, the murder of Julie Hogg. It was November 16th, 1989, and Anne Ming was starting to panic. Her daughter Julie had an important meeting in court that morning about her divorce and custody of her son, 3-year-old Kevin. Julie had been working the late shift delivering pizzas the night before, so Kevin had stayed at his grandma's. Julie had given Anne strict instructions to ring her at 7:30 a.m. to make sure she was up for her appointment, which Anne was going to drive her to later that morning. But Julie wasn't answering. After ringing several more times, Anne decided to drive the short journey round to her daughter's house. But after knocking on the door and getting no answer, she was getting very panicky, so she got in touch with her son, and together they broke in through the back door. There was no sign of Julie. In fact, Anne found the scene very strange. Julie kept a clean house, but it was a bit untidy. She normally didn't remake her bed until she got back into it at night, but the place was immaculate. Even the bed was well made. Anne knew there was something very wrong and decided to ring the police. Unfortunately, the police were pretty unhelpful, telling Anne that they couldn't do anything as she hadn't been missing for 24 hours, and unbelievably telling her she's probably got stressed about the whole custody matter and has gone off to London. Yes, very helpful. It would be 4 days before Anne could convince the Cleveland police force to take her seriously, and they then sent a forensic team to search Julie's house. They searched the house for 5 days and found absolutely nothing. At one stage, Anne rang the senior officer to ask how the search was going and was told with attitude, "Well, we haven't found any dead bodies yet, if that's what you mean." Julie Hogg was 22 years old. She was bubbly and outgoing and loved her family. She had been a teenage bride when she married Andrew Hogg, and they had had a son, Kevin, but by 1989 the marriage was in trouble and they split up. Julie and Kevin carrying on living at the family home at Grange Avenue in Billingham in Durham. Julie loved her son and her family and would never have left them. It was confirmed that Julie had been dropped off at her home at approximately 1:30 a.m. by a fellow employee of the pizza company. So where was she? The house lay locked up for 3 months until the police released the keys to Andrew so he and Kevin could return to the family home. But there was a problem. There was a horrible, pungent smell in the house, and Andrew couldn't pin it down. So he rang his mother-in-law, who arrived in minutes with all sorts of cleaning items, etc. But Anne knew this smell. She'd been a nurse for 20 years. She traced the smell to the bathroom. Above the bath, the tiles had been removed, a DIY job that Andrew hadn't got round to doing. Anne leant over the bath to sniff the wall, hoping against hope the smell might be mould. As she did so, her knees loosened the bath panel and the smell became overpowering. She bent down to look into the space under the bath, and there, partly wrapped in a blanket, was the naked, decomposing body of her lovely daughter. She turned and ran down the stairs into the front garden, taking in huge lungfuls of air. Andrew ran to her to ask what was wrong. She said through a face full of tears, "Ring the police. Julie is under the bath." Now, as you can imagine, this was very, very embarrassing for Cleveland police force. Having found nothing last time, this time they also found Julie's watch, diary and cash card that had been thrown up into the loft. On the evening of the murder, Billingham Rugby Club had thrown a stag night with strippers, etc. At this do was a man called William Dunlop, known locally as Billy. He was known to be a very dangerous, violent man, and tonight, after mixing rum, vodka and cider, and after first exposing himself, he then head-butted a doorman and was ejected from the club. He said he went to hospital to get his forehead stitched. From there he went home and slept off his drunkenness. Billy was staying at his friend's house in the next street to Julie's. Now, it did turn out that Julie and Billy did know each other and had been intimate a couple of times, the last time they had sex being only 10 days before Julie went missing. Julie's mum recognised him as someone she had seen around her daughter's house and had also seen him sitting at Julie's next door neighbour's kitchen table on the morning that she was looking for her daughter. The friend Dunlop was staying with gave him an alibi at first, but retracted it as soon as Julie's body was found. So Dunlop changed his story to he was so drunk he walked the streets till he passed out. But the doctor who had put his stitches in the wound the night of the murder blew that out of the water by saying he would not have administered anaesthetic if he had been that drunk. On top of this, Julie's keys were found under Dunlop's floorboards and his semen on her body. So Dunlop was arrested and went to trial. After 2 days of the jury being out, they could not come to a majority verdict, so the judge had no choice but to order a retrial. 6 months later, at the second trial, it basically went the same way, with the jury only taking 5 hours to tell the judge they could not come to a majority verdict. The judge had no choice but to declare a mistrial, and Dunlop went free. The jury explained the reason they couldn't come to an agreement was because there was no cause of death. If Julie had been found earlier, before decomposition ruined any chance of finding evidence, things may have been completely different. Dunlop returned to his family in Billingham and carried on with his life. The police knew he had done it, but now he had been acquitted. He would never be brought to justice because of an 800-year-old law, the one of double jeopardy, which prevents someone from being tried for the same crime twice. Instead of keeping his mouth shut, though, Dunlop took great delight in having a few pints and telling anyone who would listen about how he got away with murder. Now, I would think this was a surefire way of losing friends, but what do I know? But you didn't want to get on the wrong side of this guy. He had a hair-trigger violent temper, and he didn't care if you were male or female. He would beat you senseless with whatever he could get his hands on. A very dangerous man with a rap sheet as long as your arm. And it got bigger now he was free. He went back to his common law wife, Jane Wadworth, who was forced to fake the smiles that her loving partner was back with her. The reality was she had been dreading him being released because she knew all too well what it was like to feel the wrath of Billy Dunlop. And he wasn't home long before Jane was being beaten regularly. One time he put his hands around her throat and told her, "I'll kill you. I've done it before and got away with it." She took the decision to take the children and leave him, but he tracked her down and sent her a videotape begging her to meet him to sort out about what to do about the children, etc. She reluctantly agreed, and after their meeting, he went back to her house with them. And when the children went to bed, he sexually assaulted her. He then fetched a knife from the kitchen, and Jane is convinced if one of her children hadn't come to the top of the stairs, he would have killed her. Jane left Dunlop for good and hasn't seen him since. Dunlop then met and settled down with Donna Marie Williams, and they were expecting a baby together, but he was convinced that Donna was having an affair with a male friend of hers, Sean Fairweather. So one day he let himself quietly into Donna's flat. Sean was sat in the living room and Donna was in the kitchen. Dunlop sneaked up behind Sean and smashed him over the head with a baseball bat. Sean fell to the ground unconscious, but Dunlop hit him repeatedly in the face until the bat broke. By the time he had finished, Sean's facial skeleton was detached from his skull. Every bone in his face was broken, and the roof of his mouth was snapped in half. Surgeons spent hours wiring his face back together. But Dunlop hadn't been finished there. He then stabbed Donna repeatedly with a meat fork, puncturing one of her lungs. Fortunately, her and the baby survived. Dunlop was charged with attempted murder, but for some reason the court accepted the lesser charge of grievous bodily harm, and he received 7 years in prison. But in prison, he continued to brag about getting away with murdering Julie, happy in the knowledge that he couldn't be charged with it again. Now the police got wind of Dunlop's boasts and enlisted the help of a female prison officer that Dunlop had befriended. She wore a wire and recorded 60 hours of conversations with Dunlop where he told her how he had seen Julie's bedroom light on, so he knocked on her door. They sat chatting and drinking tea, but he got angry when she made fun of his wound on his forehead, so he raped and strangled her. He first tried to put her in the attic, but he couldn't keep his balance on the banister rail. But from up there, he could see the bath through the bathroom door and came up with the idea of putting her under the bath panel. He was going to come back at a later date and bury her somewhere else, but he never got the chance. When he was taken to Stockton police station, Dunlop freely admitted to everything, smug that he could not be charged. but the police could charge him for 2 counts of perjury for lying on oath in 2 trials, and he was sentenced to 6 years in prison. While this was happening, Julie's mum, the amazing Anne Mings, carried on fighting for justice for her daughter and would not let this go. She was determined to get the double jeopardy law that had stood since the 12th century changed. So firstly, she got her own member of parliament, and then the equally brilliant Doreen Lawrence, whose 18-year-old son Stephen was murdered in a racial attack in April 1993 in London, and the gang who murdered him also being acquitted, on her side, and they took it to the then Home Secretary, Jack Straw. Anne and her supporters forced a review into the double jeopardy law, and in 2003 the law was amended so that those who commit serious crimes can be retried as long as there is new evidence. A landmark ruling, as I believe many countries, including the USA, still have the double jeopardy law. In Billy Dunlop's case, however, the police had plenty of new evidence, and that was the full confessions from the killer. In 2006, Dunlop appeared once again in court for the murder of Julie Hogg. This time he was found guilty of murder and received a life sentence, recommending that he serve 17 years before applying for parole. In June 2019, Dunlop made a bid to be moved to an open prison as he nears 17 years in prison. His application was denied. In 2007, Anne Ming received the MBE medal for her tireless and unbelievable work to get the double jeopardy law changed. Doreen Lawrence also received some justice when 2 of the gang who killed her son Stephen were retried and found guilty of murder. Doreen received an OBE medal in 2003 for services to community relations. She promoted reforms of the police service and founded the Stephen Lawrence Charitable Fund. In 2013, she was created a life peer and is now the Right Honourable the Baroness Lawrence of Clarendon OBE. 2 remarkable ladies who changed laws and policing in the UK, who I have only just touched on in this story. And for Anne, the fight goes on, trying to keep Dunlop inside prison. Well, I hope that was a story that you found interesting. I always find it very hard to say enjoyed. Always feels wrong to me saying that about someone's death. Maybe it's just me. Anyway, that's the end of tonight's story, and this is the waffle bit. So if you've had enough of me warbling on, good night, and I hope to see you next time. Thanks for joining me. If you are a total masochist and you're still sticking around, then let the waffle begin. Now, do you remember me telling you about my friend who thinks that my voice is so boring that he uses my podcast as a sleep aid? Well, there's no justice in the world. He's only just gone and won the postcode lottery. So, congratulations, mate. I've really enjoyed spending it. I've been a guest on a couple of podcasts since I last waffled. I did a collaboration with the lovely Debbie Q of the Right Shoe podcast about the Rachel Nickell murder. And once again, for the 3rd time, we had a blast. On the first take, we were an hour in before we discovered we weren't recording. I also had a great fun on Sugar-Coated Murders, being their first guest on their new project, Slaying in the Kitchen, where I baked scones and we talked about the Happy Face Killer. So please check them out. It is fantastic. Finally, I've been experimenting myself with interviewing. So even though Murder at Bedtime will never change, there will be some extra shows with friends, family and fellow podcasters with collaborations where I get to waffle. So look out for that. If you want to contact me, please, about anything, please DM me on Instagram at Murder at Bedtime with Lyndon. Once again, thanks so much, Lindsay. You've made an old bloke really happy. And with that, it's time for me to say night night, sleep tight, and remember, watch out for frogs in boxes. They're totally bonkers. Bye.